Clara Bennett, a quiet baker whose compassion was shaped by her own father's unseen struggle with PTSD, has dedicated 6 years to a silent ritual. Every morning before dawn, she secretly leaves a warm breakfast and a handwritten note for a mysterious, unnamed man on a bus stop bench. Despite her coworkers' dismissive remarks and her manager's request to stop her charity, Clara persists, recognizing in him an echo of her father's quiet dignity. Their only spoken exchange hints at a past he wishes to keep hidden. But then, a cryptic wedding invitation arrives, promising a debt to be honored. Who is this man, and what extraordinary connection will be revealed at Clara's wedding? If Clara's story of quiet kindness resonated with you, imagine the ripple effect we can create together. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel to support our mission. Join our community as we celebrate dignity, compassion, and the profound power of simple, everyday acts that transform lives. You didn't really invite him, did you? A guest murmured the question, their voice barely rising above a whisper, eyes narrowing in disbelief at the man stepping through the church doors. His suit hung loosely on his thin frame, the fabric worn and fraying at the seams. His shoes were dulled and scraped, the soles dragging softly against the polished floor. His face, lined with deep creases carved by time and hardship, looked out across the pews with a distant, unreadable gaze. The bride saw him. Her heart surged. Without a moment's hesitation, Clara Bennett lifted the hem of her gown and dashed down the aisle, past rows of stunned, silent guests who could do nothing but watch as she rushed toward him. She threw her arms around the man in a firm, unwavering embrace, one born not of obligation or charity, but of deep, abiding love. Confusion rippled through the crowd like a wave. Whispers flared from pew to pew, quickly fading into hushed awe as the church doors swung open again with a powerful clang. 12 Marines dressed in full ceremonial blues entered the sanctuary in formation, boots striking the marble floor with crisp precision. Their faces were solemn, focused, every movement practiced, disciplined. Without a word, they approached the bride and stood beside her. In perfect unison, they raised their arms in salute, not to a commanding officer, not to a high-ranking official, but to Clara, to the woman who, for 6 quiet years, had fed and honored a man the world had forgotten. Clara Bennett never sought the spotlight. She wasn't the kind of person who commanded attention or filled a room with stories or dramatics. Her presence was quieter, subtler, like the sound of rain tapping steadily on a rooftop in the early hours. Comforting, consistent, and far too easy for the world to overlook. She had grown up in a humble house on the outskirts of Ashland, Oregon, a small town nestled in the gentle folds of the Rogue Valley. The Bennett's home always smelled of steeped tea and old pages. Her father, Gerald Bennett, had once served in the Gulf War. He had strong hands and a distant look in his eyes, as though some part of him still lived in a place far beyond what anyone else could see. Her mother, Linda, worked as a hospice nurse with a quiet strength and warmth that made even the most fragile patients feel vibrant until their final breath. Clara adored them both. They were her world. But life, as she would come to understand far too soon, has a cruel way of turning in on itself. At just 11 years old, Clara began to notice something in her father shift. The man who once knelt beside her to teach her how to tie her shoes or balance on a bicycle became quieter, tense. His smiles were slower to come. His sleep was broken by long, haunted silences. He flinched at loud noises. He seemed always on edge, even when nothing was wrong. She didn't know the term PTSD back then, not really, but she felt its presence like a shadow creeping through their home, settling in the corners of her father's once steady mind. Then, one early spring morning, he left for his usual walk and never came back. They found him near the riverbank. His boots were placed neatly beside him. His dog tags rested atop a folded piece of paper. Only Linda ever read what was written. Clara never asked. Her mother never explained. But in the quiet months that followed, an unspoken understanding settled between them. A bond forged through grief and the recognition of sorrow too heavy to name. They both had learned pain rarely announced itself. It hides. It burrows deep. And some people walk the earth like ghosts, carrying burdens that others will never see. From that moment on, Clara began to see people differently. She noticed the janitor who mopped the diner floors long after midnight with tired, aching movements. The elderly woman at the laundromat, folding her clothes with trembling hands, years heavier than her age. The veterans at the bus stop who flinched instinctively when a truck backfired nearby. She didn't look past these people anymore. She saw them. At 17, Clara found solace in baking. It began as a way to calm her mind, a form of therapy where she could create something warm, sweet, and safe, something that didn't disappear in the dark. By the time she was 19, baking wasn't just a hobby, it was her calling. She enrolled in a local culinary program and took a part-time job at Morning Rise, a cozy neighborhood bakery known for its buttery croissants and sun-drenched front windows. It wasn't long before her talent became undeniable. Within a few years, she had earned her place as head baker. She arrived at the bakery before dawn, her hands dusted in flour and her mind already lost in the rhythm of dough, heat, and steam. To the people of Ashland, Clara was the girl with the golden touch. Her pastries sold out by lunchtime. Her coffee blends had lines of regulars wrapped around the block by 6 in the morning. Her peach muffins had taken home first prize at the local food festival 3 years running. But what no one knew, what no one ever saw, was what she did every single morning before most people even hit snooze on their alarms. At precisely 5:15 a.m., Clara would quietly slip out the bakery's back door. In her hands, a breakfast bundle wrapped in wax paper, still warm, and a paper cup filled with freshly brewed coffee, made just the way he liked it. She would cross the quiet street, past the alley where the shadows still clung to the buildings, and place the bundle gently on a bench near the bus stop. It was always for the same man. He never spoke, never looked up. Likely in his 70s, with silver hair thinning at the crown and a threadbare gray coat that had clearly weathered too many cold seasons. He didn't ask for help, didn't beg, didn't meet anyone's eye. He just sat, still, quiet, constant, like a figure out of time. Clara never asked him who he was, never pressed, never waited for thanks. Some mornings she would leave a note tucked beneath the muffin. Wishing you warmth. Hope today is kinder than yesterday. She never signed them, but she always returned the next day. Clara had slept okay that night. Nothing exceptional, just a kind of rest that let her get up without complaint. The cinnamon rolls turned out especially soft that morning, pillowy and warm, the kind that seemed to melt in your mouth before you could even notice the sugar. She moved around the kitchen like she always did, quietly, efficiently, and never signed her name on the parchment wrapping the extra pastry. She didn't need to. Most of the bakery crew didn't notice her small ritual. They were busy with their own rhythms, kneading, pouring, slicing, heads down and eyes on the clock. A few had seen her slipping the wrapped food into her tote bag before the morning rush. Some rolled their eyes when they caught her doing it, but no one said anything out loud, not at first. Then, one of the newer hires, some kid fresh out of high school who thought sarcasm counted as wisdom, had scoffed one day, "You know, he's probably not even homeless. Could be hustling you." Clara hadn't responded. She hadn't even looked up from the bread dough she was folding. She didn't do it for recognition. That wasn't the point. In fact, she never even brought it up to Nathan, not once, not even during the quiet nights when they lay side by side and shared everything else. Nathan was a firefighter, the kind who spoke more through action than words. He wore his own kind of service, like a second skin, steady, quiet, humble. Like Clara, he knew that the deepest kind of goodness didn't need a spotlight. For 6 years now, through the hardest winters and the most suffocating heat waves, the same man had been there. The same man, silent, predictable, unchanging. He never asked for thanks, never offered his name, just showed up, as if on cue, trusting in the small, reliable grace of routine. Clara didn't know his story, didn't ask, she didn't need to. What she saw in him was something achingly familiar, a person the world had brushed past and forgotten, just as the world once passed over her father's silent suffering. There was something healing in that exchange, small, wordless, fragile, between the giver and the one who received, between her and him. In handing over warmth wrapped in parchment and steam, Clara felt a quiet restoration in herself too. Every morning before the first blush of sunrise stretched across the rooftops of Ashland, Clara Bennett stepped into her bakery. The kitchen greeted her with its familiar soft hum. She tied her flour-dusted apron around her waist and switched on the ovens with the precision of someone who knew the value of timing. The town hadn't woken yet. The traffic lights blinked on empty roads. The postmen were still stretching their backs in their driveways. Even the robins that nested in the rain gutters hadn't begun to chirp. But Clara had. She always did. By 5 o'clock, the first trays of croissants had begun to rise, their buttery scent curling through the air and blending with the dark richness of brewing coffee. Clara moved with a practiced grace, folding, sprinkling, slicing, her hands driven by muscle memory and quiet purpose. Most customers believed her magic lived in the golden crisp of her tarts or the melt-in-your-mouth pastries. But they didn't know what really made the place glow. The real alchemy happened before anyone walked through the doors. At exactly 5:15, she'd wrap a pastry in clean parchment, sometimes a muffin, sometimes a still warm slice of quiche, and pour 12 measured ounces of coffee into a biodegradable cup. She never added sugar, except on Fridays. For reasons she didn't overthink, Fridays always called for sugar. She'd step out the back door with her bundle, walk 2 blocks under the deep violet of early dawn, and place the meal on the wooden bench next to the bus stop. On cold days, she'd tuck in an extra napkin. When it was windy, she'd weigh the note down with a smooth stone she carried in her pocket just for that purpose. And there was always a note. Always. Wishing you strength today. Hope this brings a little light. Still here. Still baking. The man never replied. He never said a word. But sometimes he nodded a slow, almost imperceptible motion. His eyes were soft, even if distant. His posture was hunched beneath a coat that had long lost its battle with the wind and the years. Clara didn't need conversation. What she needed, what she held on to, was consistency. And in showing up, he gave her exactly that. Still, even in a small town like Ashland, no act of kindness, no matter how quiet, goes unnoticed forever. It started with Melissa, a sharp-eyed employee who had joined the bakery 3 months earlier and already had a reputation for whispering too loudly. She was observant and had no filter, which made her dangerous in a space that thrived on unspoken understanding. One morning, after seeing Clara return empty-handed through the back entrance, Melissa nudged another baker and muttered, "She's feeding that guy again. You know he never even says thank you, right?" Clara heard it. She didn't flinch, didn't turn, just kept brushing butter over the croissants as if her focus were made of stone. Then, on another morning, Melissa said it louder, loud enough for a customer at the register to catch it. "We're probably the only bakery in town giving out free breakfast to the homeless, like we've got a loyalty card or something." The customer laughed. Clara didn't. She didn't argue, didn't snap back, didn't explain herself. She just wiped her palms on her apron and moved on to glazing the scones. But the words didn't leave her. Not because they hurt her feelings, not because she gave any weight to Melissa's opinion, but because they echoed something bigger. A colder truth, a world that often mistakes quiet generosity for foolishness. A few weeks later, Kyle, the bakery's new manager, asked to speak with her in private. He was polite in a curated, careful way. Every sentence seemed rehearsed, his smile just a little too timed. He was the kind of man who measured value in profit margins and 5-star Yelp reviews. "I've been meaning to bring this up," he began, folding his hands neatly over the desk like it was a formality he practiced daily. "Clara, your work here is truly exceptional, but we've had a few comments from customers." She had mentioned once, in a tone dipped in discomfort, that it unsettled her to see the homeless man lingering nearby every morning. He paused then, letting the words hang in the air, like they were meant to draw agreement from her, as if waiting for her to nod and say she felt the same. "Your kindness is commendable," he went on, his voice carefully measured. "But perhaps it would be wiser, safer even, for everyone if we channeled that generosity toward a formal shelter, something more organized, more appropriate." Clara only smiled. She said she understood. Then, without another word, she quietly started showing up 15 minutes earlier each day, finishing her deliveries before anyone else arrived. If they preferred not to see, then she would let them not see. She could become invisible too, but she would not stop. Because Clara didn't just see a man in a threadbare coat, sitting alone on that bench each morning. She saw something deeper. She saw the lingering shadow of her father, worn and tired from years the world had never bothered to ask about. She saw anguish packed into silence, and the persistent flicker of dignity still glowing behind a pair of weary eyes. Where others saw pity, Clara felt reverence. Where others looked away, she looked closer. Even when she was rushing, even when her days were swallowed by wedding plans or fevers or fatigue, she never failed to leave that breakfast behind. She didn't need thanks. She didn't need acknowledgement. But the notes still came, small and wordless gestures, tucked into the folds of a napkin or the edge of a coffee cup. Tiny offerings from one life brushed by another. Someone noticed. That much became clear on the morning she found a wedding invitation in her mailbox, one without a return address. Clara didn't know then that 6 quiet years of unreciprocated kindness were about to ripple outward in a way that no one in town would forget. Clara never knew his name. For nearly 6 years, he was just a quiet fixture at the edge of morning, a part of her dawn like the first smell of cinnamon from the oven or the feel of cool air before sunrise. He never lingered long, never spoke, never asked. He was always there before she arrived, and he always left soon after. It was like he only existed during that fragile space between daybreak and the first bus groaning to a stop. He didn't draw attention, but Clara noticed everything. The way his coat was always buttoned up to his chin, even in April, as if he were guarding himself from a chill no season could shake loose. How he never took the food while she watched, but always returned the napkin the next day, folded perfectly in half like a sacred routine. And sometimes, if the wind had stilled and the street was hushed, she would catch him glancing at her as she turned to leave. It wasn't desperation, not even gratitude. It was something simpler, gentler, a silent recognition, a quiet, "I see you too." She gave him names in her mind sometimes. James, Walter, Samuel. One year she called him Mr. Brooks, just to have something to anchor him with, but in truth, his name didn't matter. Caring about him wasn't contingent on knowing who he was. That was never the point. Then, one bitter morning in December, the rhythm changed. She had come even earlier than usual, under a sky still cloaked in dark indigo. She left a slice of cranberry orange loaf beside a steaming cup of dark roast. Along with them, a note, wishing you warmth. She turned to head back, her breath fogging in the cold, but this time he spoke. His voice was rough, strained by long silence. "You ever get tired of doing this?" Clara stopped mid-step, not out of fear, but surprise. She had never expected to hear his voice. Slowly she turned back. "No," she answered softly. He gave a ghost of a smile, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Do you ever get tired of accepting it?" She blinked, startled by the question, and then gave a small nod. "No one's asked me that in a long time," he said. That was the only conversation they ever had. After that day, Clara started noticing subtle changes. He sat straighter. His coat, though still worn, looked a little cleaner. A new pair of gloves appeared, modest, but whole. He was still quiet, still solitary. But now there was something else. A quiet reclaiming. A man learning again how to take up space in a world that had long ignored him. And then, one rain-drenched Tuesday in February, Clara left a scarf next to his breakfast. It was a wool scarf her mother had knitted years ago, faded, fraying, but still warm, still loved. When she returned the next morning, the scarf was gone. In its place was a note, scribbled in unsteady pencil on the back of her own napkin. "Thank you for seeing me as a person." Clara folded the note carefully and placed it in her wallet. She carried it with her from that day forward. It became a kind of compass. She never needed grand gestures to believe in kindness. That had always been true. A warm smile, a muffin handed over without words, a moment of stillness shared with someone who had nothing but presence to give. Those were enough. Still, despite all the quiet encounters over the years, she had never asked him his name. Never once pressed him to explain why he sat on that bench, rain or shine, or why he always left before anyone could really notice him. People carry their reasons for silence the way others carry wounds, deeply and defensively. She respected that. Some stories are too sacred, too bruised to unfold. But the quiet mystery surrounding him began to unravel 2 weeks before her wedding. That morning, as she arrived early to prep the bakery for the morning rush, she noticed an envelope, no stamp, no return address, slipped just beneath the back door. Her name, Clara Bennett, was written on it in a careful, restrained hand, the kind that suggested precision and discipline rather than flourish. Inside was a single card. The message, simple and stark, read, "Tomorrow I will come not for cake, but to honor a debt." She stood still in the dim kitchen light, card in hand, reading the words over and over. It wasn't threatening, nor was it affectionate. It was solemn. There was a strange weight to it, like something ceremonial, military. She didn't tell anyone, not her mother, not Nathan, her fiancé, not even her best friend. But deep inside her, some old part of her memory stirred, faint like a candle flickering to life in a long-forgotten hallway. And she knew who had written it. She just didn't understand what debt he meant. On the day of her wedding, in the quiet of the bride's room, Clara stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting the veil that shimmered like dew in morning light. As she glanced out the window toward the church entrance, her breath caught. There he was, the man from the bench, standing stiffly in an ill-fitting gray suit that had clearly been pressed by hand, the fabric tugging slightly at the shoulders. His shoes, though old and worn, had been meticulously polished to a muted shine. His silver hair had been combed back with care, revealing a face that bore the map of hardship, creases etched by time and silence. He stood upright, as if remembering how to be seen. And she realized she had never seen him like this before. Not as a shadow on a bench, not as a quiet nod of gratitude, but as a whole man, even as murmurs began to stir among the guests trickling in. Who is that? Did someone invite him? What's he doing here? Clara didn't flinch. She didn't need to know the full story or the missing pieces of his past to understand one thing with absolute clarity. This man had once been someone the world saluted, and somehow, cruelly, the world had moved on without him. But she hadn't, not for one moment. So she lifted the hem of her gown, delicate lace brushing the floor, and ran, tears gathering, heart pounding, not toward the altar, but toward him. In her eyes, he wasn't a stranger. He was the embodiment of every soul the world overlooked, every silent survivor trying to make it one more day. He was her father. Or at least, he carried the ghost of what her father might have been. She didn't yet know his name was Victor Hale, didn't know he was a retired Marine sergeant, that he had led men through fire in Fallujah, that he had once been a hero until the day he lost his wife and daughter in a crash that shattered his life beyond repair, that he disappeared afterward, too broken to be found, let alone celebrated. She didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that for 6 long years he had shown up, silent, steady, and unseen. And now so had she. The church pulsed softly with anticipation. The air was warm, fragrant with lilac and lavender. Clara's dress moved like breath itself, gentle, rippling as she stepped into the sanctuary. Her hair was pinned with delicate sprigs of purple, and in her hands she carried a bouquet the color of spring's first sigh. It should have been a moment for the aisle, for vows, for tradition, but her eyes weren't on the altar. They were on the door. He was there. Victor. Though the name was still a mystery to her, the man was unmistakable. He stood just inside the threshold, caught in the gold of morning light. His suit, though old, had been prepared with dignity. The cuffs were neatly creased. His hands, calloused and rough, held an envelope to his chest as if it were a medal. His posture bore the bend of a lifetime, but he stood as if braced by something unbreakable inside him. People began whispering. Who invited him? Isn't that the man from the bench? You've got to be kidding. She let him come to the wedding? Clara heard them all, every breath of doubt, every sideways glance, but none of it touched her. Without pausing, without glancing at her bridesmaids, the photographer, or the wedding planner whose eyes were wide with alarm, Clara gathered her skirt in both hands and walked, not down the aisle, but across it, straight toward the man no one else seemed to understand. Gasps rose like wind through leaves, and then she reached him, and she wrapped her arms around him, tight, with the kind of embrace that binds time and grief and memory all at once. Her mascara ran down her cheeks. The curls near her temple fell loose, untamed, but nothing else mattered. I still remember your eyes, she whispered, her voice unsteady. That first morning in winter, you looked so tired. He didn't respond right away. His breath caught, and then, his voice steady and unexpectedly clear. I remember the muffin, he said. Blueberry, still warm. I hadn't tasted kindness in months. Clara smiled through the blur of tears. The church had fallen utterly silent, as though the world itself paused to bear witness. And just then the doors behind them creaked open once more. A sharp gust of wind swept through the chapel, and something new began. The wind caught the edge of Clara's veil just as the church doors opened with solemn grandeur. Through the aisle came 12 Marines, their footsteps perfectly synchronized, their presence thunderous as the sound of polished boots echoed sharply against the stone floor. Each man was clad in full-dress blues, white gloves spotless, medals gleaming, creases so sharp they looked etched by blade. At the front of the column marched a tall Marine, his chest heavy with ribbons, his nameplate reading, Duncan. He led the unit with unwavering precision, and as they approached the altar where Clara and Victor stood, the congregation instinctively parted to clear the way. In one powerful motion, the Marines raised their arms and delivered a crisp salute. It wasn't directed at a commanding officer, it wasn't for a general, it was for Clara Bennett, the soft-spoken woman who spent her days kneading dough and frosting cakes in a quiet bakery tucked into the heart of town. Their gesture cut through the air like lightning, full of weight, full of meaning. Captain Duncan stepped out of formation, his expression composed but his voice thick with reverence as he faced the crowd. On behalf of Alpha Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, he said, his words echoing through the pews, we're here today to honor the woman who, without knowing it, helped one of our brothers survive the darkest time of his life. He turned slightly and gestured toward Victor, who stood beside Clara, stunned and speechless. This is Sergeant Victor Hale, Duncan continued. In 2004, during an ambush in Fallujah, he saved 9 Marines, including me. He kept going, even after shrapnel tore into his leg. For his bravery, he was awarded the Silver Star, but he never came forward to claim it. The air inside the church seemed to still. No one breathed, no one moved. Captain Duncan reached for a framed shadow box and held it up for all to see. Inside was a weathered photograph in a gleaming metal. The image showed a younger Victor, battered and bloodied, hauling a Marine across a street littered with debris. Behind him, a barely conscious Duncan could be seen, clinging to life. If not for this man, Duncan said, his voice catching, I wouldn't be here today. And if not for Clara Bennett, Sergeant Hale might never have survived to remind us what quiet valor really looks like. Clara's breath trembled. Her eyes found Victor's, and she saw the tears welling up in them, silently sliding down his cheeks. I never knew, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That was the point, Victor said gently. I wasn't looking for gratitude. I just needed to feel human again. And you? Her voice broke. You gave me that? A bridesmaid stepped forward, her bouquet held tight in her trembling hands as she wiped tears from her cheeks. I work with Clara, she said softly, her words meant for everyone in the room. She never told us, but she'd come in early, buy ingredients herself, and leave breakfast at the shelter without fail. Another coworker stepped forward, her voice brittle with emotion. We teased her about it, she admitted. We didn't understand, but now I do. Captain Duncan turned to Clara once more. In the Corps, we have a rule, never leave a Marine behind. Clara Bennett lived that rule without ever putting on the uniform. A beat of silence passed, and then, slowly, everyone in the church rose to their feet. No one told them to. They stood not out of politeness, but because they felt it in their bones. They were witnessing something rare, something quietly powerful, something real. Nathan, Clara's groom, stepped forward with calm resolve and extended a hand to Victor. Sir, he said, it would be an honor if you'd walk Clara down the aisle. Victor didn't answer right away. The weight of the moment held him in place. But then he nodded, slowly, reverently, and reached for Clara's hand. Together they walked, toward vows, yes, but also toward a story deeper than ceremony, written in invisible acts of kindness, stitched together by years of quiet compassion, finally given light. The wedding didn't just touch the hearts of those inside that church. It made headlines in local papers all across Oregon. A single photo, a bride in lace, her eyes glistening, flanked by 12 saluting Marines, spread like wildfire. It was shared across social media, picked up by hometown news, and eventually found its way into national military publications. But Clara Bennett barely noticed the attention. She wasn't chasing recognition. She was too busy living a life that never asked for applause. She and Nathan postponed their honeymoon by a week, not because of money, but because Clara had an idea. And when Clara had an idea, she acted on it. With the wedding gift money, they launched the Hearth Bench, a humble breakfast initiative run from the church fellowship hall. Every morning from 6 to 8 a.m., volunteers served hot coffee, homemade pastries, and warm meals to anyone who needed a place to rest, eat, and be seen. There were no forms to fill out, no IDs required, no conditions to be met, just a long wooden bench, and the understanding that everyone who sat there mattered. Carved lovingly by the hands of a local craftsman, the bench bore an inscription on the backrest that read, "Feeding one person can nourish a life the world forgot." At the beginning, there were only 3 regulars. 2 elderly men came quietly, and a younger woman sat without ever lifting her gaze to meet anyone else's. Yet even in that silence, word began to spread. By the 3rd week, the fellowship hall was no longer half empty. It was full. Victor never returned to the bench. Clara hadn't expected him to. Deep down, she knew. He had done what he came to do. With a quiet acceptance tinged by sadness, she assumed he had gone back to his old life, a solitary one, defined by long shadows and silent mornings. But she was wrong. One morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just a postmark from Arizona. Inside was a postcard of red rock canyons, streaked with sunlight and ochre cliffs. A single handwritten line stretched across the back, and Clara knew the writing instantly. "Every breakfast is a salute. Thank you." A month passed, and another postcard came. This one from Montana, then another from Virginia. Each time the return address was missing, but the message was always the same. Clara began pinning them up on the bulletin board in the kitchen. She never told the volunteers who had sent them. Still, they gave the growing collection a name of their own, the Wall of Gratitude. Captain Duncan visited once a month, sometimes more, always in civilian clothes, accompanied by several Marines. Those same men from the wedding. They blended into the crowd, not seeking recognition, but choosing instead to serve. Quietly, humbly. They rotated kitchen shifts, ladled hot soup, scrubbed pots, wiped down tables, and shared lighthearted conversations with the guests. One crisp morning, Duncan brought along a young recruit. With a hand on the young man's shoulder, he said, "This is what it means to carry the code off the battlefield." Later, Duncan shared more. Victor was finally receiving care through the VA, counseling, medical treatment, a safe, clean bed. But he wasn't just receiving help, he was giving it. He had begun guiding other veterans through the system, helping men like him who had slipped through the cracks and fallen into silence. "He's not just surviving anymore," Duncan said. "He's leading again." Clara, for her part, kept baking just as she always had. She still rose at 4:30 in the morning, still tied her apron strings with that same quiet resolve. But now, when she stepped outside at 5:15, there was no need to leave food on the bench. Instead, she walked through the doors of a room alive with stories, souls once forgotten, now gently remembered. The hearth bench wasn't just a table anymore. It had become something more, a symbol, a memory carved into the present, a reminder that simple, unseen kindness, when practiced without expectation, could echo further than any parade, any speech, any medal ceremony. True transformation rarely begins with fireworks. Sometimes it begins with a warm muffin and a folded napkin that simply reads, "Still here, still baking." Clara Bennett had never craved attention. She never imagined that her quiet mornings, kneading soft dough, wrapping pastries with careful hands, writing notes with slow, intentional strokes, would ripple outward and touch so many lives. But that's the nature of real kindness. It doesn't trumpet its arrival. It doesn't demand credit. Sometimes the smallest, most invisible gestures carry the loudest echoes in a silent world. Today, the hearth bench stands not just as a place to eat, but as a sanctuary, a quiet shrine of respect. A space where the unseen become visible again, where those who have been broken can begin to feel whole through warmth, food, and the gentle recognition of their worth. Behind the serving counter, framed and protected beneath glass, hangs the very first note Victor ever left Clara. "Thank you for seeing me as a person." And just below it, Clara added a line of her own. "Everyone who sits at this table has a story worth knowing. There is a lesson woven into this story, one not shouted but softly spoken. True heroism often isn't loud. It doesn't arrive wrapped in flags or accompanied by fanfare. Sometimes it's just the act of showing up, day after day, offering a hand, a plate, a word, without expecting applause or acknowledgement in return. It's that steady presence that can change the course of someone's life. Victor's journey reminds us that behind worn-out coats and weathered faces are untold stories, chapters filled with quiet courage, for sacrifice and resilient hope. And Clara's unwavering compassion teaches something just as essential, that every person deserves to be seen, to be heard, and to be honored. Not only for what they've done, but simply for who they are. When people ask Clara why she kept doing it, why she continued baking for a man she barely knew, she would offer only a soft smile and say, "Because no one should ever feel invisible." The story of Clara and Victor is one that stretches far beyond the walls of a fellowship hall. It holds a quiet, timeless truth, a truth that speaks volumes in a hurried world like ours, especially here in America, where the noise often drowns out the gentle acts that matter most. In the whirlwind of our daily lives, it's all too easy to pass by those who struggle in silence, the ones who remain unseen, unheard, much like Victor once was. We become absorbed in our routines, blind to the quiet pain of others. But Clara reminded us that compassion doesn't need a spotlight or applause. It doesn't require loud declarations or heroic gestures. What it does require is a willing heart and steady, deliberate action. Her story shows us that even the smallest kindness can pierce through someone's darkness. True empathy lies in recognizing another's humanity without judgment, in seeing someone as they are, without needing to fix them, just to be present. This tale holds up a mirror, gently asking us, when was the last time we truly saw someone? Not for their mistakes or hardships, but simply as a person deserving of grace. It makes us question how often we allow our assumptions to speak louder than our compassion. How frequently do we miss a chance to extend a gentle word, a smile, a pause to truly listen? Clara's quiet strength wasn't in grand speeches or heroic rescues. It was in her consistency, in her refusal to look away, in the dignity she offered without fanfare. And this is the heart of it. We all have the power to be that presence for someone. Whether it's offering a neighbor help without being asked, choosing patience in a moment of frustration, or simply acknowledging another person's worth with a warm look. It matters. These acts, as small as they may seem, ripple outward in ways we'll never fully know. They plant seeds of hope. They say, "You are seen, you matter." For those of us who have weathered storms in our own lives, this story is also a quiet call to action. Not everyone will ask for help. Not everyone knows how, but we can be the light they didn't know they needed. Not to save them, but to stand beside them, to remind them they're not alone. We'd truly love to know, have there been moments in your life when an act of kindness made all the difference? How do you bring compassion into your community? Please share your experiences and reflections in the comments. Your voice could be exactly what someone else needs to hear to feel a little less invisible today. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being here, for taking the time to listen. If this story resonated with you, we invite you to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Let's grow a community that doesn't just talk about kindness, but lives it, quietly, consistently, powerfully. Take care, be kind, and remember, sometimes the smallest acts carry the greatest weight.